Welcome to Fluent Daily, the English listening channel for advanced learners at B2 and C1 level. Every episode features a rich, flowing conversation in natural English on a topic that is genuinely worth thinking about: history, psychology, science, philosophy, and more. There are no simplified sentences here, no slow speech, no vocabulary drills. Just real English spoken naturally on ideas that matter. This is Fluent Daily. Let's get into it.
Today we have a great story, so let's get started right now. Right at this exact second, your brain is actively choosing to completely blind you to like 99.99% of the universe.
Yeah, which is kind of terrifying when you really think about it.
It really is. I mean, think about the tactile sensation of the chair beneath you right now, or, the ambient temperature of the room, or even the micro fluctuations of light bouncing off whatever device you're holding, or those 5 browser tabs you probably have open. Your nervous system is aggressively throwing all of that data straight into a cognitive trash can.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, people think that if it didn't do that, if we could just process it all, we'd suddenly become these hyper-aware super geniuses.
Oh, totally. Like we'd unlock the secrets of the universe.
But you wouldn't. You would actually just instantly collapse from catastrophic cognitive overload.
Wow. Okay, well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, based on this absolutely fascinating stack of research you sent our way, which, by the way, ranges from 19th century philosophy texts to modern fMRI brain scans, we are not going to give you another guilt-ridden lecture about your screen time.
No, definitely not. I mean, we constantly hear that our attention spans are broken, right? That they've been stolen by the attention economy.
Right, the whole "we can't focus anymore" narrative.
Yeah, but that framing completely misses the point of what attention actually is. We need to take a much more mechanical approach today. The general anxiety about screen time usually treats attention like, like a battery that we're just failing to charge or a muscle we're too lazy to flex.
Which just makes everyone feel guilty all the time.
Exactly. But when you actually examine the neurobiology and the cognitive architecture documented in these sources, that entire framing just falls apart.
It totally crumbles.
It does. Understand that the physical machinery of your attention, its strict metabolic limits, its evolutionary vulnerabilities, is the only functional way to actually protect it. I mean, you can't secure a fortress if you don't even know where the architect put the doors.
That's a great way to put it. So to find those doors, we have to establish what attention actually is, structurally speaking. And looking through the materials you shared for this deep dive, it's wild to see that the foundational definition here doesn't even come from a modern neuroscience lab.
Right. No fMRI machines involved at all.
No. It comes from a guy writing with a dip pen in 1890.
Yeah, William James. He's basically considered the father of American psychology. He published this massive foundational text called The Principles of Psychology.
And what's so striking about reading James today is how incredibly precise his introspection was. I mean, even without any brain imaging technology.
It's amazing. The consensus in cognitive science today still largely revolves around his central thesis from back then. James wrote that attention is, and I'll quote this because it's so good, that taking possession by the mind, in clear and vivid form, of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought.
Taking possession by the mind. I mean, there is a real aggression to that phrasing, right?
Yeah, it's not passive.
No, it paints a picture of the brain actively seizing something, rather than just, passively receiving whatever light or sound happens to hit it.
The active nature is central. But the second half of his definition is where the real paradigm shift happens.
All right.
James continued by stating that concentration implies a withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. He understood, over a century ago, that the defining characteristic of human attention is not its capacity to process more.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's not about processing more.
No, its defining characteristic is that it is ruthlessly selective. It's literally a biological mechanism designed to process a tiny fraction of information at the absolute non-negotiable cost of ignoring everything else.
So rather than a vacuum cleaner trying to suck up every piece of dust in a room, it's more like a laser pointer.
A microscopically narrow laser pointer. Yeah. And the sheer mathematics of human perception make this selectivity mandatory.
The math is what really blew my mind in these sources.
It's staggering. Your human sensory system, so your retinas, your cochlea, the millions of mechanoreceptors scattered all across your skin, it's bombarded by an unimaginable stream of data. The research quantifies this at roughly 11 million bits of information flowing into your central nervous system every single second.
Wait. 11 million bits per second.
Every single second.
That is just a staggering amount of data. I mean, that encompasses the sound of my own breathing right now, the hum of the refrigerator 3 rooms away, the exact pressure of my shoes on my feet, like everything.
Every single physical stimulus interacting with your body. But, and here's the catcher, conscious processing, the part of your brain that is actively engaged, the part that's parsing the grammar of this conversation right now.
Yeah.
It has a bandwidth limit of about 40 to 50 bits per second.
Oh, wow. Let me just make sure I'm grasping the scale of that bottleneck. 11 million bits are screaming at the sensory gates, and the brain only lets 40 or 50 bits actually enter conscious awareness.
That is the brutal math of perception. The primary function of your attentional system is basically to act as a triage unit. It has to select the roughly 0.0004% of available reality that gets privileged, conscious processing.
And the rest.
The remaining 99.99% is either relegated to automatic unconscious processing, like your body maintaining its posture in that chair, or it's entirely discarded, just thrown away.
I want to visualize this triage process. It sounds like attention operates like an incredibly strict bouncer at an exclusive nightclub.
I love that analogy.
Right. You have a line of 11 million people wrapping around the block, all begging to get inside the club. The bouncer surveys this massive crowd, lifts the velvet rope, and points to maybe 4 or 5 individuals, letting them in while telling, 10,999,995 people to just take a hike.
The mechanism operates very much like that. And the critical question for cognitive psychologists has always been, what criteria does the bouncer use to make that selection?
Right. What gets you on the VIP list?
Exactly. How does the brain decide which 40 bits constitute reality in any given second? It actually relies on a continuous competition between 2 types of signals.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is bottom-up processing. This is entirely stimulus-driven. So if a glass shatters in the kitchen, or a bright light suddenly flashes, or someone across a crowded room shouts your name,
that information gets an immediate override, right? It bypasses the line.
It totally bypasses the line. Evolutionarily speaking, sudden, loud, or fast-moving stimuli usually correlate with danger. So your brain is hardwired to prioritize them, regardless of what you were consciously trying to do.
It's the survival override. Like, if there's a tiger hiding in the brush, it doesn't matter how engrossed you are in picking berries, the tiger gets the bandwidth.
Precisely. The tiger gets the VIT access. Now, the second mechanism is top-down processing.
And this one is more intentional.
Yeah, this is goal-driven and internally generated. It's what you are actively trying to achieve. For example, if you're waiting at a busy train station looking for a friend who texted you that they're wearing a yellow coat, your top-down filters actively recalibrate your visual cortex to scan for the color yellow.
So yellow gets the VIP access to conscious awareness.
Exactly. Yellow gets in, and red, blue, and green are just deprioritized.
I have to push back on this architecture a little bit, though. When you look at the sheer volume of discarded information, the fact that we are literally blind to the vast majority of our environment, it feels like a massive evolutionary design flaw.
It does feel like that, doesn't it?
Yeah. Wouldn't a superior organism have a brain capable of consciously processing, say, 1 million bits a second? Just imagine the situational awareness you'd have.
It's totally natural to view it as a flaw, especially when we inevitably miss something important. But this extreme selectivity is a non-negotiable structural requirement.
Why, though?
Think about the physical hardware of a computer processor. If you force a standard CPU to run 1,000 highly intensive rendering programs simultaneously, what happens?
The fan spins up, the system overheats, and the whole thing crashes.
It freezes completely. The human brain is a biological processor, and it's governed by strict metabolic limits. It runs on physical fuel glucose and oxygen.
Right.
If that selective filter failed, if all 11 million bits flooded your conscious working memory simultaneously, you wouldn't achieve some state of transcendent omniscience.
You'd just blue screen.
You'd experience catastrophic cognitive overload. You'd be utterly paralyzed, incapable of prioritizing the sight of an oncoming car over the sound of the wind or, like, the feeling of your socks.
Or feeling of your socks.
Right. Filtering isn't a weakness. Filtering is literally the mechanism of survival.
That sets up a really fascinating tension, though. If our brains are biologically mandated to be this aggressively restrictive, what happens when we intentionally try to force the system?
What do you mean?
Like, what happens when we tell the cognitive bouncer, hey, I only want to listen to this one specific voice in this completely chaotic room?
Well, that exact scenario is basically the birthplace of modern selective attention research.
Really?
Yeah. In the early 1950s, an acoustic engineer and psychologist named Colin Cherry became obsessed with what he coined the cocktail party effect.
I've heard of that. It's that highly specific, almost magical feeling where you're at a loud, crowded party, surrounded by overlapping conversations and clinking glasses, yet you can somehow tune the noise out and lock onto the person standing directly in front of you.
Exactly. Cherry wanted to understand the mechanics of that filtering. And crucially, he wanted to know what happens to the massive amount of auditory data you are actively ignoring.
Where does it go?
Right. To test this, he designed a brilliant experimental setup using early tape recorders and headphones, creating a task called dichotic listening.
How did it work?
So he would place these bulky 1950s headphones on a participant. He then played two completely different, continuous spoken messages simultaneously, one isolated in the left ear and one in the right ear.
Okay, that sounds confusing already.
It gets harder. He instructed the participant to shadow one of the ears.
Shadow.
Yeah, shadowing means the participant had to listen to the message in, say, the right ear, and repeat it out loud, word for word, in real time, while utterly ignoring the left ear.
Oh, wow. That sounds physically exhausting, like trying to verbally shadow a podcast while someone else is reading a textbook directly into your other ear.
It demands an immense amount of top-down executive control. Participants found it highly taxing, but they could actually do it. They could accurately shadow the target message.
Okay.
The breakthrough, however, was what Cherry discovered when he interrogated them afterward about the unattended ear, the one they were ignoring.
What did they remember?
They knew practically nothing about the semantic content of the message they had been actively ignoring.
Wait, nothing at all? Even though the sound waves physically hit their eardrum and vibrated their cochlea?
Nothing semantic. I mean, they could report basic physical properties. They could tell Cherry if the voice in the ignored ear was male or female.
Yeah.
Or if the audio suddenly shifted from human speech to, like, a pure tone.
So the bouncer noticed the physical traits.
Right. But they could not report any meaning. They had no idea what the topic was. They couldn't remember a single word. And in some variations of the experiment, they didn't even notice when the language in the ignored ear suddenly switched from English to German.
That is deeply unsettling. The raw acoustic data enters the physical ear, the auditory nerve fires the electrical signal into the brain, but the attentional filter intercepts it and just shreds it before the brain can even decode the meaning of the words.
It shreds it. And this specific finding ignited a massive, decades-long debate in cognitive psychology between what they call early selection and late selection models of attention.
Early versus late.
Yeah, the core dispute was about where exactly the filter is located in the processing pipeline. Does the brain filter out the ignored data early, based purely on physical characteristics like pitch and location, before it even analyzes the meaning?
Which would explain why they didn't notice the German.
Exactly.
Right.
Or does it subconsciously process everything to a semantic level, meaning it secretly understands all the words, and then filter it out late, right before it reaches conscious awareness?
Based on Cherry's German switching experiment, I would absolutely bet on early selection. If they didn't notice the language change, the brain clearly never processed the meaning.
You're touching on exactly why early selection models dominated initially. But later researchers, like Ann Treisman, found some really interesting anomalies.
Like what?
Well, for instance, if you are ignoring the audio in your left ear, but that audio suddenly includes your own name, you almost always hear it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If the early selection model were perfectly rigid, your name should be blocked just like everything else.
But because your name is highly relevant to your survival or, your social standing, the bottom-up override kicks in.
Exactly. So the modern consensus reconciles this by demonstrating that the filter is actually flexible, and its strictness depends entirely on your current cognitive load.
How hard you're thinking.
Right. If the task you're focusing on is incredibly demanding, like shadowing a really fast talker, your brain employs early selection. It completely shuts the gates because it has zero spare processing capacity.
Makes sense.
But if the task is easy, your brain has leftover metabolic power and will process the ignored information a bit more deeply using late selection. It monitors the background noise just enough to catch a highly relevant signal, like your name.
So the strictness of the filter scales with how hard the brain is working. That makes perfect logical sense for hearing. But if auditory filtering is that aggressive, what happens with visual processing? Because intuitively, I feel like I trust my eyes far more than my ears.
Oh, everyone does.
Right. If something physically crosses my field of vision, I'm going to see it.
That intuition, The belief that we see everything in our visual field is a massive psychological illusion.
Really?
Visual attention is just as ruthless as auditory attention, if not more so. And this brings us to one of the most famous and honestly culturally pervasive experiments in the history of psychology.
Oh, the gorilla one. Daniel Simon's and Christopher Chabry's invisible gorilla experiment from 1999. I'm so glad this was in the sources you provided.
It's a classic for a reason.
For anyone who hasn't encountered this, the setup sounds like a practical joke. So the researchers filmed a short video of 6 people passing basketballs around in a small area. 3 people are wearing bright white shirts and 3 are wearing black shirts.
Yep.
And the researchers asked the viewers to perform one seemingly simple task. Count the exact number of times the players in the white shirts passed the ball.
A task that requires intense, sustained, top-down visual tracking. You have to actively monitor the fast-moving white shirts and actively inhibit the black shirts from entering your conscious count.
You are totally locked in. You're watching the screen muttering 1, 2, 3. And then, right in the middle of this chaotic basketball passing, a person in a full, incredibly conspicuous gorilla suit walks straight into the middle of the players.
Right into the center of the frame.
The gorilla stops, turns to face the camera, thumps its chest with its fists, and then calmly walks off screen. It is fully visible for 9 uninterrupted seconds.
And when the video ends, the researchers ask the viewers the critical question. Did you notice anything unusual? Did you see the gorilla?
And the results are completely mind-bending. Roughly 50% of the people who watch the video look the researchers in the eye and say, "What gorilla?"
They don't just miss it. They are often indignant. They literally refuse to believe a gorilla was in the video until the researchers rewind the tape and play it back without the instruction to count the passes.
And then it's painfully obvious.
Without the top-down cognitive load, the gorilla is blindingly obvious. This phenomenon is termed inattentional blindness. It proves that we can fail to perceive totally unexpected, highly visible objects right in front of us simply because our attentional spotlight is directed elsewhere.
The crucial takeaway for me here is that the 50% who missed the gorilla didn't miss it because they were distracted.
Right.
It's not like their phone buzzed and they looked away. They missed it because they were too focused. They executed the top-down command so perfectly that the filter discarded a giant primate.
That is the paradox of focus. Sustained vigilance for specific targets creates systematic vulnerabilities. You do not see what you are not actively looking for. And while the gorilla video is a brilliant classroom demonstration, the real-world stakes of inattentional blindness are, well, they're terrifying.
Where does this actually manifest outside of a 1990s psychology lab?
It manifests constantly in high-stakes operational environments. Consider medical imaging. There's a deeply unsettling study where researchers track the eye movements of expert radiologists who are examining CT scans of lungs.
Okay.
These highly trained doctors were intensely focused, using their top-down filters to hunt for tiny, faint white nodules that indicate early-stage lung cancer.
So the medical equivalent of counting the white shirts.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The researchers superimposed a tiny semi-transparent image of a gorilla onto the lung scan. It was roughly the size of a matchbook in physical space.
Yeah.
83% of the expert radiologists completely missed the gorilla.
83%.
And the eye-tracking software proved they didn't just fail to glance at that section of the scan. Many of them looked directly at the gorilla. The light hit their retinas.
Wow.
But because their cognitive filter was firmly set to the parameters of cancer nodule, the anomalous shape of a gorilla was identified as irrelevant noise and discarded before it reached conscious awareness.
That is a staggering implication for how we trust our own senses. I mean, if highly trained medical professionals can look directly at an anomaly and have their brain delete it, what chance do the rest of us have?
It affects air traffic controllers, who are so focused on a specific altitude layer that they fail to notice an unexpected aircraft crossing their radar.
Jeez.
It affects drivers who are actively looking for other cars at an intersection and pull out directly in front of a motorcycle because their brain was filtering for the shape of a car. Inattentional blindness is a fundamental, inescapable feature of how our visual and attentional networks are integrated.
So, if the brain is working this hard to maintain the spotlight, if it is actively deleting gorillas and motorcycles from reality just to maintain focus, what is physically happening inside the skull? What are the mechanical, biological processes driving this triage?
To understand the physical machinery, we really have to transition to the neuroscience. Over the last few decades, thanks to advancements in functional MRI technology, our understanding has just exploded.
What's the biggest shift?
The foundational shift we have to make is discarding the idea that attention is a single entity in the brain. There is no one specific attention center that just turns on and off.
So it's not a single volume dial that controls our focus.
Far from it. Michael Posner, a pioneering neuroscientist in this field, identified that what we call attention is actually produced by a collection of distinct, partially overlapping neural networks, and they each have highly specialized functions.
How did he categorize them?
He categorized them into three primary systems: the orienting network, the alerting network, and the executive network.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of each, starting with the orienting network.
So the orienting network is responsible for the physical movement of your sensory spotlight. It prioritizes sensory input by selecting specific modalities or locations in space. This involves pretty primitive, deep brain structures like the superior colliculus, alongside regions like the right posterior parietal cortex.
What does that look like in practice?
If you're walking down the street and a dog aggressively barks to your left, the orienting network is the system that physically snaps your neck, your eyes, and your auditory focus toward that exact spatial coordinate.
The biological targeting system. It basically aligns the sensors.
Exactly.
What about the alerting network?
Alerting is about physiological readiness. It maintains a state of vigilance, a hypersensitivity to incoming data. This network relies heavily on a tiny cluster of neurons in the brainstem called the locus coeruleus.
Wait, the locus coeruleus?
Yeah, it acts as the primary source of norepinephrine, or noradrenaline, for the entire central nervous system.
Okay, so how does that chemical arousal actually feel to us?
Think about driving on a highway at night during a torrential downpour when your windshield wipers can barely keep up.
Oh, I hate that.
You're white-knuckling the steering wheel, your heart rate is elevated, and you are intensely scanning the darkness for the red flash of brake lights. That intense high-wire state of readiness is the locus coeruleus flooding your cortex with norepinephrine. It's an energetic state of high alarm.
So the orienting network aims the camera, and the alerting network keeps the camera powered on and hypersensitive.
That's a great analogy.
That leaves the executive network.
The executive network is the boss. This is the top-down, goal-directed control we've been discussing. It's responsible for resolving conflicts between competing stimuli.
Give me an example.
When you are sitting at your desk trying to comprehend a dense financial report, and your phone lights up with a text message, your orienting network wants to look at the light. Your alerting network spikes with the anticipation of social information.
Right.
It is your executive network that has to step in, suppress those deeply ingrained biological urges, and enforce the goal of reading the report.
Where does the executive network live in the brain?
It is heavily reliant on the anterior cingulate cortex and, crucially, the prefrontal cortex, the highly evolved area of the brain sitting right behind your forehead. And the biological mechanism the prefrontal cortex uses to enforce focus is not passive. It relies on a process called active inhibition.
Active inhibition, meaning the brain isn't just pulling the relevant information closer, it's physically deploying resources to shove the irrelevant information away.
Exactly. To maintain focus on that financial report, your prefrontal cortex must actively hold the parameters of the task in your working memory while simultaneously acting as a physiological barricade against every other thought, sensory input, and impulse.
Wow.
And here's the most important biological reality of this entire deep dive. Active inhibition is metabolically expensive. It literally requires the consumption of glucose and oxygen. It burns physical fuel.
This connects so many dots for me. When I finish a deeply focused 3-hour work session, or I finally log off from a tedious high-stakes virtual meeting, the mental exhaustion I feel isn't just a metaphor.
No, it's very real.
My brain isn't full.
The reality is that my prefrontal cortex has physically depleted its metabolic reserves, trying to hold the barricade shut against a constant siege of distractions.
Yeah.
That is the precise physiological mechanism of cognitive fatigue. The metabolic capacity for active inhibition degrades over time with sustained effort. The bouncer literally runs out of energy.
That makes perfect sense.
Furthermore, the prefrontal cortex is exquisitely sensitive to your physiological state. If you are experiencing high acute stress, intense emotional arousal, or most devastatingly sleep deprivation, your prefrontal function is heavily compromised.
So it's weakened from the start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You physically lack the metabolic energy to sustain the active inhibition, which is why your focus shatters under those conditions.
Reframing focus as an extreme, metabolically taxing state of active effort completely changes how we should view our own failures of attention.
It really should.
We constantly judge ourselves for losing focus, as if we are failing to maintain our natural baseline. But the biology suggests that intense focus is highly unnatural.
It is.
If maintaining focus requires bringing massive amounts of glucose to hold the door shut, what happens when we let go? What is the actual biological default state of the human brain?
The moment you release that top-down executive control, the brain defaults to a massive distributed web of regions known as the default mode network, or the DMN.
The DMN.
Yeah. This network was largely unrecognized until the early 2000s, when neuroscientists started noticing a consistent pattern in fMRI data. They discovered a stark anti-correlation between the brain's task-positive networks, the executive focus regions, and the DMN.
Anti-correlated, meaning they operate on like a seesaw mechanism. When one goes up, the other must go down.
Precisely. When you are actively deploying your prefrontal cortex to solve a math problem or read an email, the default mode network is actively suppressed. But the millisecond you complete the task and release your focus, the DMN roars into frantic activity.
And what does that feel like to us?
The DMN is the primary neural correlate for mind wandering, daydreaming, ruminating on the past, simulating the future, talking to yourself in your internal monologue.
So if I am understanding the architecture correctly, the brain's fundamental resting state is to just wander off into its own internal narrative. Focused attention is nothing more than the temporary, biologically exhausting suppression of that default state.
That is the biological reality. The sheer effort of paying attention is largely the physical effort of keeping your own default mode network pinned down.
If the brain's default operating system is designed to wander, maybe the entire cultural narrative around daydreaming is wrong. We treat mind wandering as a character flaw. We label it as laziness or a lack of discipline.
We do, yeah.
But evolution doesn't usually waste massive amounts of neural real estate on useless functions. What is the wandering mind actually doing when we let it off the leash?
It's engaging in heavy, necessary background processing. There was a landmark experience sampling study conducted by Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert that provided incredible data on this.
What did they do?
They developed a smartphone app that pinged thousands of participants at random intervals throughout the day, asking them what they were doing, what they were thinking about, and how happy they felt. They discovered that humans spend roughly 47% of their waking hours mind wandering.
47%. Nearly half of our conscious lives are spent mentally detached from our physical reality.
We're constantly engaged in thoughts unrelated to our immediate environment. But the most culturally significant finding from that study was the emotional correlation.
How so?
They found that people consistently reported lower levels of momentary happiness when they were mind wandering compared to when their minds were on task. And this was true even if the task they were performing was relatively mundane or unpleasant.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The paradox there is fascinating. We spend 47% of our lives defaulting to a cognitive state that actively makes us less happy in the moment.
Right.
Why would human evolution wire a default state that makes us miserable?
Because evolution does not optimize for your momentary psychological comfort. It optimizes for your long-term survival and reproduction. The deficit framing of mind wandering, the idea that it's a failure of focus that needs to be medicated or disciplined away, completely ignores its vital cognitive functions.
So what exactly is the DMN accomplishing during that 47% of our day?
First and foremost is prospective thought, which is the mental simulation of the future.
Okay.
When you are zoning out on your commute or while folding laundry, your mind is usually rehearsing an upcoming difficult conversation with your boss, or calculating how you'll handle a financial stressor, or gaming out different scenarios for a weekend trip. You're running simulations in a safe internal environment so you can navigate the actual future more effectively.
The brain is running predictive models. That is undeniably critical for survival. What else is it doing?
It is the primary engine of creative incubation. Have you ever spent hours banging your head against a complex problem at work, utilizing every ounce of your executive network, and gotten absolutely nowhere?
All the time.
But then 3 hours later, while you're taking a shower or walking the dog, the perfect solution suddenly just pops into your conscious awareness.
Yes. The ubiquitous shower thought phenomenon. It happens to me constantly.
That is the default mode network actively solving the problem. When you stop obsessively directing your attention with the prefrontal cortex, the DMN takes over and begins sifting through your memories, linking disparate pieces of information and finding novel associations in the background. It's a massive unconscious associative engine.
That's incredible.
Furthermore, the DMN handles autobiographical memory consolidation, making sense of your own ongoing life narrative. And it maintains your complex social goals.
What do you mean by social goals?
Well, human society requires us to constantly monitor intricate social webs. Who is angry with whom, who owes a favor, what our status is. You cannot process that immense social data while actively hunting for food or filling out a spreadsheet. You need the downtime.
So the mind wanders toward personally relevant, future-oriented concerns because it is continuously background processing the exact information required for our long-term success. It literally needs that offline time to integrate reality.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, when you apply this architectural understanding to clinical definitions, it profoundly recontextualizes conditions like ADHD.
ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I mean, the very name of the condition implies that the person lacks the capacity for attention. How does modern neuroscience reframe that?
The name is largely a relic of an older behavioral observation that neuroscience has heavily revised. ADHD represents the extreme end of a continuous spectrum of executive control. Every human being varies on this spectrum.
Right.
But the core struggles associated with ADHD, the difficulty maintaining sustained attention on uninteresting tasks, the impulsivity, are not caused by a deficit in the fundamental capacity to pay attention.
They aren't?
No. Individuals with ADHD are perfectly capable of entering states of incredibly intense sustained attention, often called hyperfocus, when the stimulus is deeply interesting or highly rewarding.
So the bouncer isn't missing.
The bouncer is fully capable. The neurological core of ADHD is a disorder of attentional regulation. It is deeply linked to how the prefrontal cortex utilizes dopamine to assign value to different tasks.
Okay, so it's about the reward system.
Right. The regulatory system struggles to deliberately direct the executive spotlight toward chosen long-term goals, particularly when those goals are not immediately stimulating, and especially when they're competing against an environment flooded with high dopamine distractions. The prefrontal cortex is basically fighting a biological headwind in regulating the filter.
To borrow the metaphor, it's not that the nightclub doesn't have a bouncer. It's that the bouncer struggles to hold the door shut when there is an incredibly loud, flashing, high dopamine carnival happening right across the street. The pull of the bottom-up stimulus is just too strong for the metabolic capacity of the top-down control.
That captures the biological friction perfectly. ADHD highlights what happens when the delicate, highly metabolic executive system struggles against environments that demand sustained, unnatural focus.
Which brings us to the most urgent part of this deep dive. Our brains have this fragile, easily exhausted, top-down executive network. Simultaneously, they have this powerful natural tendency to wander toward highly stimulating or personally relevant information. So what happens when modern technology is specifically engineered to target and exploit those exact biological vulnerabilities?
You get the modern attention economy. And to truly grasp the scale of the exploit, we have to look at the historical context you provided in the source materials. This isn't a new concept invented by social media executives.
No.
It was conceptualized by a polymath and economist named Herbert Simon back in 1971. Simon presciently observed that in an information-rich world, a wealth of information necessarily creates a dearth of something else. Information consumes the attention of its recipients. Therefore, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention.
He predicted a poverty of attention in 1971, decades before the internet even existed in a meaningful commercial way.
He saw the trajectory of human technology. Later, in 1997, writer Michael Goldhaber expanded on this, arguing that the global economy was undergoing a fundamental shift. He posited that material goods or money would no longer be the primary driving force. Human attention would become the ultimate scarce resource that every corporation would be forced to compete for.
And then the smartphone was introduced, completely removing the physical barriers to that competition.
The smartphone transformed the competition for your attention into an industrialized, ruthlessly engineered science. The mechanisms you interact with on modern platforms, the user interface designs that compel you to scroll for hours past your bedtime, are not accidental features.
They're designed that way on purpose.
They are deliberate, weaponized design choices optimized through sophisticated A/B behavioral testing on billions of human nervous systems.
We have to break down the mechanics of this hijack. How exactly are these platforms exploiting the neurobiology we just spent the last half hour mapping out?
They exploit the architecture by systematically bypassing your top-down, goal-oriented executive network and directly hijacking your bottom-up, stimulus-driven alerting network. They speak directly to the primitive instincts of the locus coeruleus and the orienting reflexes.
Walk me through a specific mechanism. How does my phone trigger a bottom-up override when I am trying to work?
Look at the core interaction design of almost every social feed. The variable reward schedule. Consider the pull to refresh gesture.
Okay.
You drag your thumb down on the glass, a little icon spins to create a moment of anticipation, and then the screen populates. Maybe you have 3 new notifications and a highly engaging video. Or maybe you have absolutely nothing. That unpredictability is not a technical limitation. It is the core feature.
Because it mimics a Skinner box. This is operant conditioning.
Precisely. B.F. Skinner demonstrated this decades ago. If you place a pigeon in a box and give it a food pellet every single time it pecks a button, the pigeon learns the relationship. It pecks when it is hungry, and it ignores the button when it is full. The behavior is regulated.
Right.
But if you introduce a variable ratio reinforcement schedule where the pigeon receives a pellet randomly, maybe after 2 pecks, maybe after 20, maybe not at all, the pigeon's behavior becomes obsessive. It will peck the button endlessly. The unpredictability creates massive spikes in dopaminergic anticipation in the brain.
It's the exact neurological mechanism that makes a slot machine the most addictive piece of machinery in a casino. When I pull down on my screen to refresh, I am physically pulling the lever on a digital slot machine, and the payout is unpredictable social validation.
You're activating the exact same dopaminergic pathways.
Yeah.
And the tech companies pair this variable reward with the elimination of natural stopping cues.
Like the infinite scroll, there is no next page button to click. The content just seamlessly loads as long as you swipe.
Historically, human media consumption was bounded by natural stopping cues. The newspaper ran out of pages. The television program rolled its end credits. The chapter of the book concluded.
You had a forced break.
These physical stopping cues provided a critical moment of friction. They gave your prefrontal cortex a brief window to reevaluate its goals, check the time, and say, okay, the task is complete, let's redirect our attention to sleeping. The infinite scroll eradicates that friction. It denies your executive network the natural pause it requires to reassert top-down control.
Tristan Harris, the former design ethicist at Google, makes a chilling argument about this dynamic. He suggests that the smartphone represents the first technology in human history designed explicitly to outcompete human willpower.
And when you map his argument onto the biology we have discussed, it is entirely accurate. You are taking your prefrontal cortex, which we have established is metabolically fragile, easily exhausted by active inhibition, and highly vulnerable to stress and fatigue, and you are placing it in direct competition with supercomputers and algorithms that are explicitly engineered to locate its breaking point.
Trying to fight off an algorithm with pure willpower is like trying to hold back a flood with a kitchen sponge. You are pitting an exhaustible biological resource against an inexhaustible, highly optimized machine. The sponge is going to lose every single time.
Exactly. The variable rewards create an artificial sense of agency, hijacking the bottom-up systems that evolved to spot predators. The algorithms provide an endless, frictionless stream of novel stimuli. Your top-down control simply runs out of glucose trying to hold the barricade shut.
This presents a fairly bleak picture of our cognitive autonomy. If relying on willpower is a mathematically losing battle against engineered distraction, and if forcing focus is biologically exhausting anyway, how can anyone achieve deep, meaningful work? Are we just trapped oscillating between exhaustion and distraction?
We are not trapped, because the human brain is capable of entering an optimal state of attentional engagement where that paradox completely dissolves. A state where focus is incredibly intense, yet requires almost zero metabolic effort from the prefrontal cortex.
The holy grail of human attention. How is that biologically possible?
The state was conceptualized and rigorously studied by the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who termed it flow.
Flow. We hear athletes and musicians talk about this constantly. Being in the zone where everything just clicks.
Csikszentmihalyi defined flow as a psychological state of absolute, effortless absorption in an activity. When an individual enters a flow state, they experience a profound loss of self-consciousness. Time perception distorts. Hours can pass in what feels like minutes. Most importantly, the activity itself becomes intrinsically rewarding, entirely independent of the final outcome.
If the cognitive bouncer is usually so easily exhausted by maintaining focus, how does a flow state bypass that metabolic cost? How do you actually trigger it?
Flow is triggered by a highly precise alignment between the objective challenge of a task and the subjective skill level of the individual performing it. It operates on a delicate balance.
What happens if it's not balanced?
Well, if a task is too simple relative to your skills, you experience boredom. Your top-down attention disengages and your default mode network takes over. Start mind-wandering.
Like, if I try to stay deeply focused on doing basic addition, my brain immediately detaches and starts thinking about dinner.
Conversely, if the task is vastly too difficult relative to your current skills, you experience anxiety. Your bottom-up alerting network spikes, stress hormones flood the system, and your executive network becomes completely overwhelmed trying to manage the cognitive load.
Right.
But if you discover the optimal challenge level, a task that pushes you just slightly beyond your current comfort zone, where your skills are fully demanded but not overwhelmed, a remarkable neurobiological shift occurs.
Wait, so what exactly changes in the brain's architecture during flow?
The prevailing neuroscientific model for flow involves a state called transient hypofrontality.
Hypo meaning reduced or lower, and frontality referring to the prefrontal cortex. Wait, so you're telling me the most intense state of focus we can achieve actually requires less work from the prefrontal cortex?
That is the beautiful, counterintuitive paradox of flow. The metabolic activity in the prefrontal cortex actually dials down. Because the task complexity and your skill level are perfectly synchronized, the environment itself sustains your attention. You no longer need to exert active, top-down inhibition to block out distractions because the task is so perfectly engaging that there is simply no cognitive bandwidth left for distractors to even register.
It's like switching a car from a grueling manual transmission and stop-and-go traffic into a smooth cruise control on an open highway. The prefrontal cortex, your foot constantly working the pedals, gets to step back because the momentum of the engagement is carrying the system forward automatically.
That is a perfect mechanical analogy. The heavy self-monitoring functions of the prefrontal cortex, the internal voice that criticizes your performance, worries about the time, or monitors your social standing, shut down. The intense executive effort required to direct the spotlight is no longer necessary. Attention transitions from a massive metabolic drain into a self-sustaining, effortless state.
That sounds idyllic, but we have to ground this in reality. We cannot exist in a permanent state of flow. Life requires us to perform tasks that don't perfectly match our skills. We have to read dry textbooks, file taxes, or sit through unengaging meetings. For the listener looking to reclaim their cognitive autonomy and apply this to real-world goals, what actually works? Because there is a massive, multi-million-dollar industry selling brain training apps and supplements that promise to fix our focus.
And based on the structural neurobiology we've covered, we can confidently dismiss a large portion of that commercial market.
Really?
Yeah, the empirical evidence supporting most commercial brain training games apps designed to boost your focus through repetitive tasks is highly limited. The data generally shows that you simply get better at playing that specific game, but that skill does not transfer to improved executive function in your broader life.
So no apps.
No apps. However, if we look at the underlying biology, there are 3 highly effective, scientifically validated interventions to upgrade your attentional control.
Let's systematically go through them. What is the first structural upgrade?
The first is environmental design. This directly addresses the futility of relying on willpower against engineered algorithms. Stop trying to use your prefrontal cortex to fight the environment. Willpower requires executive function, which burns finite glucose. Instead, you must aggressively reduce your attentional load by physically eliminating the sources of bottom-up distraction.
Don't fight the distraction. Prevent it from ever entering the sensory field.
Exactly. When you need to engage in deep work, leave your smartphone in a completely different room. Utilize software blockers that prevent access to social feeds. Restructure your physical workspace so that the visual and auditory triggers for distraction never reach your sensory threshold in the first place. You conserve the bouncer's metabolic energy by ensuring the troublemakers never even make it onto the street outside the club.
It's about engineering a space where the default action is focus rather than engineering your brain to fight the space. What is the second upgrade?
The second is the single most powerful physiological modulator of cognitive performance in human biology, and it is the one we culturally dismiss the most: sleep.
I knew sleep is going to be central to this.
Its impact cannot be overstated. The prefrontal cortex is arguably the most sensitive region of the entire human brain to sleep deprivation. And we are not just talking about the extreme scenario of pulling an all-nighter. The clinical research shows that just one night of partial sleep restriction, meaning you get 6 hours of sleep instead of 8, produces the exact same measurable decrement in executive attention control as 2 full nights of total sleep deprivation.
Wait, I need to make sure I heard that statistic correctly. Sleeping for 6 hours impairs my focus just as much as staying awake for 48 straight hours.
Specifically regarding your executive attentional control, yes. The biological restorative processes required to replenish the prefrontal cortex are heavily backloaded into the later stages of a full sleep cycle. When you cut it short, the prefrontal cortex cannot maintain active inhibition the next day. And the most insidious part of sleep deprivation is that it actively impairs the self-monitoring function of that very same prefrontal cortex.
Meaning you lose the ability to accurately judge your own impairment.
Precisely. You wake up on 6 hours of sleep, you drink a coffee, and your compromised brain tells you, I feel fine. But objectively, your attentional capacity is devastated. Vigorously protecting an 8-hour sleep window is a vastly more powerful intervention than any active cognitive training program ever invented.
Sleep is non-negotiable hardware maintenance.
Got it. What is the third intervention?
The third is mindfulness meditation. Specifically, the practice of focused attention meditation.
When people hear meditation, they usually think of stress reduction or relaxation. How does it physically alter the mechanical attention network? It functions as a literal, targeted gym workout for the executive network. In a standard focused attention practice, you sit quietly and deliberately direct your top-down attention to a single, continuous stimulus, typically the physical sensation of your breath. After a few seconds, what inevitably happens?
Your mind wanders. The default mode network kicks in, and suddenly you're thinking about an email you forgot to send.
And that failure of focus is the entire point of the exercise. The practice of meditation is not about successfully preventing the wandering. The neurobiological workout occurs in the precise moment you notice the wandering, you realize your DMN has taken over, you consciously detach from that thought, and you actively deploy your executive network to redirect the spotlight back to the physical sensation of the breath. That specific cognitive cycle focus, notice the wandering, inhibit the distraction, redirect, refocus, is the equivalent of a bicep curl for the prefrontal cortex.
So you are repeatedly practicing the exact mechanical motion of active inhibition and redirection.
And the clinical data supports this. Meta-analyses of fMRI studies demonstrate that individuals who maintain a consistent mindfulness practice show structural changes in the brain, resulting in highly replicable improvements in attentional stability, a reduction in unwanted mind wandering, and a decreased susceptibility to bottom-up distractors.
So we control the physical environment to protect our bandwidth, we fiercely defend our sleep to physically power the network, and we actively exercise the redirection mechanism through mindfulness. I want to take this entire neurobiological framework we've built and apply it directly to a tangible, real-world goal. Because you, the listener tuning into this deep dive, are currently engaged in one of the most cognitively demanding long-term tasks a human brain can undertake: acquiring and mastering a second language, specifically English. How does the biological architecture of attention dictate how you should actually study?
The relationship between your attentional filter and your ability to acquire a language is direct and absolute. In the field of applied linguistics, one of the foundational theories is Richard Schmidt's noticing hypothesis.
The noticing hypothesis.
Yeah. Schmidt proposed a stark rule. For any specific feature of a new language to be acquired and integrated by your brain, it must first be consciously noticed. You cannot acquire a complex grammatical rule, a nuanced piece of vocabulary, or a subtle pronunciation pattern simply by allowing the language to wash over you as background noise. Attention is the absolute non-negotiable gateway to memory.
So the common advice of passive listening, just putting an English podcast on in the background while you clean the house, thinking that your subconscious will just absorb the fluency, is biologically flawed.
It might provide marginal benefits for recognizing general phonetic rhythms or intonation, but for actual acquisition of structure and meaning, active top-down attention is vastly superior. But here's where we synthesize this with the concept of flow. To maximize acquisition, you must engage with English content that hits that optimal difficulty level. In linguistics, this is termed comprehensible input. The material should be just slightly above your current proficiency level. If you listen to something too simple, your default mode network takes over and you start daydreaming. If you listen to a dense academic lecture way beyond your vocabulary, your executive network gets overwhelmed, you feel anxious, and you stop learning.
So you have to find that sweet spot.
Exactly. If you find that sweet spot content you understand but that challenges you with new structures, the listening becomes intrinsically engaging. You enter a flow state, the bouncer steps back, and the language acquisition happens with significantly less metabolic friction.
That makes sense for someone still building their core vocabulary. But what about you, the listener, right now? Because you are already at a B2 or C1 advanced level, you are understanding this complex neurobiological discussion without struggling to translate every single word. How do you utilize your attention to push past the intermediate plateau and achieve true mastery?
This is where you deploy deliberate attention to form. Because you are advanced, you do not have to burn all of your prefrontal cortex's metabolic energy just trying to decipher the basic meaning of our sentences. You have spare attentional capacity. The secret to breaking the plateau is utilizing that leftover cognitive bandwidth to actively hunt for specific linguistic features.
What should they be hunting for?
Do not just listen to what is being said. Actively direct your top-down filter to notice how it is being said. Direct your spotlight toward collocations, which specific words naturally pair together. Notice the discourse markers. How does the host phrase a transition when challenging a point? Pay attention to the phonological patterns. Notice exactly how the intonation drops at the end of a declarative statement. By actively commanding your orienting network to look for the structural form of the language, you convert a standard listening exercise into a high-powered, deliberate acquisition session. You use your attention to bridge the gap between merely being competent and sounding completely effortlessly natural.
So what does this all mean for you as you move through the rest of your week? It means the pervasive cultural narrative telling you that your brain is broken is fundamentally wrong. Your attentional system is a breathtaking marvel of biological engineering, designed to ruthlessly filter reality to keep you alive. It means you don't need to waste money on a brain training app to fix a machine that isn't broken. Instead, you respect the biology. Get 8 hours of sleep to fuel the prefrontal cortex, put your phone in another room to give your active inhibition a fighting chance, and when you listen to English, actively hunt for the phrases that bridge the naturalness gap. We began this deep dive picturing a fractured attention span and a screen full of overwhelming browser tabs. But hopefully, looking at the research today, you now see the profound, elegant biological machinery working tirelessly beneath it all. From the strict bouncer in our brain letting in only 0.00000% of reality, to the exhausted prefrontal cortex, the hijacking by smartphones, and the effortless power of flow.
Understanding that physical machinery is the absolute prerequisite to reclaiming your cognitive autonomy. But as we close this analysis, I want to leave you with one final, practical reframing to consider. We spend so much energy actively trying to suppress our wandering minds, treating it as a failure of discipline. But tomorrow, when you catch yourself losing focus or daydreaming, don't immediately punish yourself. Instead, ask a different question. What complex, long-term problem is your default mode network secretly trying to solve while you are busy trying to stare at a screen?
Give your biology the grace to wander. Thank you for taking this profound journey into the architecture of your own mind with us today. Protect your 40 bits per second of conscious reality, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.